let's start because I think time is ticking on and I have to finish 10 minutes before the end of the hour. It's actually going to be a 40-minute session rather than an hour session. So, my name's Olly, and I'm going to be giving you an introduction to Cantonese. It's great to see so many people here. I had no idea how many people would be interested in Cantonese. I've been learning it for the last 9-10 months or so, kind of part-time, and I think I could say it's by far the most interesting language I've ever learned. So I hope to give you a bit of an introduction and to give you a bit of inspiration to go away and learn it. I would say that I'm far from being an expert on Cantonese. This is going to be a purely personal perspective on the language that I'm going to give you. So this is what we're going to talk about in the session. We're going to look at what Cantonese is. It's not as straightforward as you might think. We're going to look a bit at the history and geography of the region, the Cantonese-speaking region. We're going to look at some differences between Cantonese and Mandarin. We're going to talk about tones, because that's a big deal for Cantonese. And then, if we've got time, we're also going to look at actual dialogue in Cantonese so you can get an idea of the language. So, to start off, I want to get an idea of what you already know about Cantonese, because I imagine some of you know some things, and some of you probably know nothing at all, which is perfect. So I'm going to give you a few questions to look at. Number one, what is Cantonese exactly? What's the role of Hong Kong in the Cantonese world? How many people speak Cantonese and where? What's the difference between Cantonese and Mandarin? How many tones are there? And in Chinatowns around the world, which language are you going to hear? Mandarin or Cantonese? Okay, so just 1 minute with the person next to you, I'd like you to discuss these questions. That's all the time I'm going to give you. And I'm not going to tell you the answers either. What I'd like you to do is to listen out for these answers over the course of the talk, and hopefully you'll fill in some of the blanks during the talk. Okay, so does anyone here speak Cantonese? Okay, fantastic. So if there's anything I said that's wrong, feel free to correct me. All right. So what is Cantonese? Well, Cantonese is one of 5 major Chinese languages. It's, technically speaking, it's actually a dialect of Cantonese. But I think between the different Chinese languages, there's a big enough of a difference for it to actually be considered a language by itself and not just a dialect, because there are such big differences between Cantonese and, say, Mandarin. I'm sure most of you know that Mandarin is now the official language of China. It's what is spoken around most of China. But in actual fact, the Mandarin dialect itself has only been around for about 700 or 800 years. Cantonese, on the other hand, you can trace it back well over 2,000 years. So it's a really old language with lots and lots of history. Now, to really understand what Cantonese is and where it comes from, there is one part of China that you need to know about. And that is this part here in the red. In Cantonese, this is pronounced Guangdong, and it is I guess in the southeast part of China. Would anyone be able to pinpoint Hong Kong on this map? Do you want to tell me whereabouts it is? It's not actually marked.
Yeah, I mean, not 100% sure, but I would say.
Yeah, bang on. Good job. Yeah. A lot of people think it's this, not this, that's Hainan, and this of course is Taiwan. So this province here, the Guangdong province, is really the most important part in understanding what Cantonese is and where it actually comes from. Because historically, Guangdong is the home of Cantonese, and it's where the purest form of Cantonese actually came from. Now, when the English were busy in this part of the world, they had a name for the capital of this province, which was Canton, that's what they called it. And so the word Cantonese is actually a word to describe the people from the capital of Guangdong province. So that's where the word Cantonese actually comes from. Now, I don't expect anyone to get the right answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. How many people in the world speak Cantonese? 200 million? Any more? 50 million?
A billion.
A billion? Okay, the correct answer is 50 billion people.
Excuse me, 50? We have a problem that the speaker did not show up, Robert Lang Green. I'm guessing that his flight got delayed or something. I have no information from him.
Okay.
So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind taking this lecture into the main room, and then the other people can also listen.
Okay. Are we not going to run out of time? Is time a concern?
No, I was just thinking there's a lot of people there who are currently have nobody to listen to, so if I send them all here, then there's a problem, but if you come over there, then it's okay.
Do we start again from the beginning?
But they can easier come here than we can come there.
Yeah, if they want.
I mean, this process.
Should I give a talk on clear?
Or just spontaneous
Okay.
stuff.
Yes.
Like the
If you want to give a talk.
Spontaneous stuff in the big room. Like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's a good idea, you know, to improvise and to have spontaneous stuff in the other room because he prepared everything already here. So, I mean, sorry, but I think that would be a great idea. Do the spontaneous thing. Yeah, I'm sure that's possible.
Let the alligators enter the big room. Alligator room.
So I guess I'm carrying on then. So yeah, as we said, 100 billion people in the world speak English.
100? Sorry, I can't.
100 billion.
I said 100 billion, but it's
You just said 50, liar.
okay. So let me give you some hard facts. In fact, it depends how you measure it. If you take just the people from the Chinese area, from the Guangdong area, then you're looking at about 65 million people approximately. If you then take the Hong Kong area and parts of Macau, and then you move over into East Asia, where people speak Cantonese in Singapore, Malaysia, in Thailand, and Vietnam, then you're looking at actually around 100 million people in the world who speak Cantonese. Official numbers and different estimates do vary, but I think all considered, this is the most reliable ballpark number that I've come across. Now, where does that put Cantonese in terms of the rest of the world? More than German. More than Javanese, the language of... More than Korean. And considerably more than French. So Cantonese is a massive language, and you can see how in the future it's going to become even more important. So, talking about the history of Cantonese and where it came from, let's go back to our map of China. this is China around here. Here's Hong Kong, right there. Looking at this map, are there any? This is a topographical map of China. So what it's showing is the terrain and the land itself. Are there any features of this map that really jump out at you?
It's hot over there.
It's not a heat map.
Yeah, it's really, really hot. Right. Anything else that jumps out from a geographical perspective?
Well, the mountains are on the west.
Right. Okay, so you've got
Yeah.
a huge amount of China that is actually covered in mountains. And this part here is obviously a really big mountain range. But you've also got a lot of mountains down here, some up here, and then a lot of rivers down here. Now, there are two main features of China that are quite important. In the northern part, huge amounts of the north of China are actually flat plains with very little going on geographically. But in the southern part, you've got a lot of rivers, a lot of mountain ranges. And as I'm sure lots of you know about the history of languages and how they evolved, this is a very, very important part in the history of Chinese. Because in the north, with these flat plains, what does that mean for the people who live there? Yeah, they're moving. They're spreading all across the country. They're coming into contact with other people very, very easily. And so, in the south then, you've got the Guangdong part where Cantonese comes from, and they're surrounded by mountains and rivers, which obviously means you've got a pocket of an area which is very difficult to break out of. And so, this is the main reason that the Cantonese language was able to develop into such a distinct language, because geographically it was so hemmed in by mountains and rivers. Whereas in the north, with all these flat plains, people that were speaking dialects such as Mandarin were able to spread across the whole country. And yeah, so this is one of the most important historical parts of the language. And the most important thing to note is that really this area is contained by mountains and rivers, so that enabled Cantonese to really develop. Now, Hong Kong itself was administered by the British for a long time. They took over Hong Kong in 1841. And another part of the area called Macau was taken over by the Portuguese a lot earlier in 1557. And this is the next important part of the story of Cantonese. When the British and the Portuguese arrived in these islands, what do you think they found? Yeah, someone said nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, so the Portuguese and the British, they arrived in Hong Kong and Macau and they found nothing. There's nothing there. There's very few people. The land, if anyone's been to Hong Kong, you'll know it's one of the least hospitable places in terms of geography. You've got huge mountains everywhere. So the British and the Portuguese arrived in Hong Kong and Macau, and they needed to build up the places. There was nothing there. So, how did they do it? Well, quite simply, because Hong Kong and Macau is right here next to Guangdong, they started bringing Chinese labourers in from this province, from Guangdong into Hong Kong and Macau, to start building up the country. These were the people who built up the Western architecture for the Brits and the Portuguese, and the Chinese architecture from the Chinese. And so over a long period of time, you had people migrating from Hong Kong, from the southern part of China, into Hong Kong and Macau. And then this is where the real Cantonese culture really started to develop in modern times, because you had all these people in this very enclosed area. So with Hong Kong and Macau, like that, this became the real hotbed of Cantonese, and it's where the language and the culture really developed, because it was completely isolated from the rest of China. Now, these days, Hong Kong is well known for being a sort of a melting pot of East and West. People always talk about Hong Kong as being the part where East meets West. And it does, because you've got banks and huge multinational companies and things like that in Hong Kong. But the reason it was like that in the first place, stretches back a long time. And it's about the British and the Portuguese moving in here, bringing Chinese in there to build up the islands, and that's where the real fusion of the cultures started. Now, earlier on I asked you a question about Chinatowns around the world. Did anyone have an idea, an answer to that question?
Unfair. I have unfair advantage.
You have an unfair answer? Okay, yeah.
So just because I'm from Liverpool, like it's the Europe's oldest Cantonese area. So whenever you go, particularly in Chinatown, all of the the colour stuff in there, and also linguistically, all you ever hear is Cantonese, and particularly a lot of the ones that come across, and a lot of the ones that own chip shops in Liverpool now, were all originally from Hong Kong.
Cantonese chip shops.
So yeah, it's always yeah.
Okay, yeah, so when you go to Chinatowns around the world, it is changing a bit now just because China is just exploding. But certainly up till recently, most of what you would ever hear in Chinatowns around the world, whether you're in Australia or San Francisco or Tokyo or New York, is going to be Cantonese. So let's look at...
Also in Europe, in the Chinese fast foods, I think they prepare more the southern cuisine of China, so the Cantonese, not the Mandarin one.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, and this is all linked because, as we said earlier, the British and the Portuguese started bringing people into Hong Kong.
Sorry, let me correct you very quickly, because let's not go on like this. Okay, so the Cantonese kitchen and the Cantonese speakers are only in majority, and you can only find them in target countries where the majority immigrate. That's Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and English-speaking territories.
Okay.
Europe is predominantly Mandarin-speaking.
Okay.
Yes, here,
Okay.
where we are. Hard to find Cantonese speakers, very easy to find Mandarin speakers. 80–90% are all from Wenzhou, from the east of China.
Okay. Sure.
So Europe is the exception for the rule. Okay.
Fantastic point. Although I would say in Chinatown in London there are a lot of Cantonese speakers as well.
Certainly, because it's an English-speaking territory.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so yeah, so this is the point, and so obviously when people from here start to move to Hong Kong, they're now part of the British Empire and the Portuguese Empire at the time. And so what happened was people were started to be allowed to actually move from Hong Kong and from Macau to other parts of the world. So people from Chinese from Hong Kong were starting to move abroad to North America, to Australia, to the UK. And so this accounts for the movement of people abroad. Now at the same time, for many, many years, China had very, very strict controls on immigration. People were not allowed to leave the country at all. And so whilst people from most of China were stuck and they couldn't leave, if they left and came back, they'd be killed, which no one wants. People from Hong Kong were slowly starting to spread out throughout the British Empire. And that's why nowadays in most Chinatowns around the world you're going to find Cantonese speakers. And yeah, it's very interesting if you go to Hong Kong these days, the amount of, the sense of the buzz on the street and the vibrancy of the culture there. People in Hong Kong feel fiercely proud of their roots, and they really consider themselves to be very different and completely separate from mainland China, and you can really feel that when you go there. And so because of this movement, this is why in more recent years, in the 20th century, the Cantonese culture has really been bubbling away in this hot pot that is Hong Kong. And a lot of the well-known cultural icons of Hong Kong came out as a direct result of that. So, I think a lot of you will probably know quite a bit more Cantonese culture than you might think. So, I'm going to give you a quick test. Even without the name written in the bottom right-hand corner, this is?
Bruce Lee.
What have we got here? Yeah, this is probably my favourite thing in the world. This especially, Tassil belt, roasted pork buns, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Anyone played this before? Yeah, what language did you hear in the game? Do you remember? Well, if you play this game, people are actually speaking Cantonese because it takes place in a Chinatown. Anyone seen this film?
Yeah.
Great film. Did you know it originally came from a 2002 Hong Kong film called Infernal Affairs, which is one of the best films of all time. So I really suggest you check that out.
What was the original one?
Infernal Affairs. Yes, amazing film. Anyone seen this? Directed by John Woo.
John Woo, yeah.
Right. So Cantonese culture really is spreading everywhere. And these are the main kind of exports from Hong Kong these days. You've got Cantonese food, which is just fantastic. You've got Canto Pop, which is not so well known in the West, but certainly around East Asia, it's a big deal. Popular video games are starting to use Cantonese. And of course, you've got Hong Kong cinema, which is one of my passions for sure. Now, I wonder if you can answer this question. Third, fourth,
Number one.
Second?
first. Okay, we've got all the numbers from 1 to 4. I mean, Hollywood is obviously the biggest, followed by Bollywood. Cantonese cinema is the third largest film industry in the entire world, and it's actually the second largest exporter of movies. So I think Bollywood is quite contained in India to a certain extent, and so there are a lot of really well-known Cantonese films which are exported around the world, such as Kung Fu Hustle, Infernal Affairs. This is the one I was mentioning before. In the Mood for Love.
Yeah.
Amazing film. Enter the Dragon, another classic. Yeah. So yeah, you've really got an awful lot of Cantonese culture going on. But you didn't come here to just listen to our culture, you came here to hear something about the language, I guess. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between Cantonese and Chinese. And now I have to say that I don't speak Mandarin, and I'm far from being an expert on it. So a lot of this has come from research that I've done. So if anyone would like to correct me at any point, do feel free. Mandarin is the official language of China, has been for a long time. And there are many similarities between Mandarin and Cantonese, obviously because they come from very similar roots. But at its heart, Cantonese is, like I said, is a much older language. It's over 2,000 years old. And Cantonese these days retains a lot of the more ancient forms of Chinese, which have been lost in Mandarin. The key point, I think, to know if you go to Hong Kong is that people in Hong Kong read and write in standard Chinese, which is just the same as all the rest of China. Okay, so I'll say that again. People in Hong Kong read and write using the same Chinese as the rest of China, with one key difference, which is okay, yeah, the traditional and simplified characters. In mainland China, they use a series of simplified characters, which were introduced by Mao in the 50s in order to improve literacy. But Hong Kong has retained traditional Chinese characters, just like Taiwan also has. And this is the main difference between Hong Kong and mainland China when they're reading and writing. Now, I think in reality, a lot of simplified and traditional characters are actually quite similar. Some of them are exactly the same, some of them have a few differences. But it wouldn't be so fun if I just showed you characters that look exactly the same. So I'm going to show you a few which are very, very different, and this will give you an idea of just what it means to have a simplified character and a traditional one. So, here you go, this is a simplified character from mainland China, which means traditionally, the original character looks like this. How they got from that to that, I've got no idea.
Good question.
Yeah, that would be a topic for an interesting talk, I think. Okay, this one, which is abundant or charming. Most of these characters actually you wouldn't see on their own, they would be used in collocation with other words. This is the simplified one, it's pretty simple. This is what it used to be. Lastly, the character for opinion or view. Like this. So you can see, you can imagine, you can feel for the kids in Hong Kong and Taiwan, you know, going to school and having to learn these traditional characters rather than simplified ones. But I think people from Hong Kong are very, very proud of the tradition. They really do like it. So, I said before that people in Hong Kong, they read and write using standard Chinese, albeit with traditional characters. So that's not Cantonese. Cantonese is what they speak every day. And people in Hong Kong, when they speak with other people, they speak in Cantonese. It's a spoken dialect, which isn't written down very much. Can be written down in more kind of popular magazines and things like that. But on the most part, Cantonese is a language which is purely spoken. So if I were to say something to you in Cantonese, and then go to write it down, I would probably write it down in using standard Chinese, and it might be a little bit different to what I actually say. It's quite tricky. It took me a long time to get my head around this difference. So the main things to remember is speaking and daily interactions are in Cantonese. Reading and writing happen in standard Chinese. So as for the spoken Cantonese language, obviously it is based on standard Chinese, but I think the main difference is probably the words and phrases that are used in Cantonese are very, very different from Mandarin. Certainly they sound different. The cultural difference has given rise to an awful lot of new words and phrases. And if you get a Cantonese speaker and a Mandarin speaker facing off and having to speak to each other, how well do you think they do? Can they communicate with each other?
They write down everything.
They can write down everything, or I'm not sure if the mainlanders will understand. I've heard a few people make some similarities. Some people say it's a bit like Spanish talking to Portuguese, or maybe Italian talking to Spanish. I don't know. What the Chinese say is they call it the chicken talking to the duck. That's the metaphor that they use.
With the deck.
And I'm not sure which one is the duck and which one is the chicken. That's the metaphor they use. As for the grammar, it's very closely linked, although Cantonese does have some of the more ancient grammatical forms from old Chinese, which Mandarin has lost now. And so, like I said, in Hong Kong you've got this really massively, quickly, rapidly evolving culture, and there's a huge youth movement going on in Hong Kong. People are very, very, they feel very separate from mainland China, and there's a whole load of new slang and new expressions that are coming up all the time. And some of you may be familiar with this guy, Carlos Do. Anyone seen his stuff on YouTube? No? You've got to check him out, he's fantastic. And he basically, the only thing he does is make videos of new slang and trendy expressions in Hong Kong. Because a lot of people who maybe left Hong Kong when they were teenagers or in their 20s, they can't understand a lot of this stuff because it's so quickly evolving. This, for example, is Gongju Beng, which translates as princess sickness. And it's a word to describe girls who want to be pampered and taken care of and have stuff bought for them. So yeah, really vibrant, really quickly evolving language. I was going to talk a little bit about politics, but I'm not going to. I'm running out of time. So, let's dive in and actually look at some of the nuts and bolts of the language. How many tones do we have in Cantonese? 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay.
Undefined.
The consensus is that there are 6 tones in Cantonese. There are probably more. But I think what's happened is, over the years, especially recently, some of the more subtle tone differences, they've started to kind of dissipate, and they're not quite as pronounced. There's a high falling tone, for example, which isn't really distinguishable from the high tone. So we've got 6 tones in Cantonese, as opposed to how many in Mandarin?
4 to 5.
4 to 5, yeah. Okay, so these are the tones in Cantonese. We've got a high tone, C. We've got a high rising, which is C. We've got a mid-level, which is C. We've got a low falling, which is C. We've got a low rising, C. And a low, which is C. Right? So, one more time from the beginning. C, 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 C. Let's try it. C, 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 C. Low, C, 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 listen first and then you try, okay? C, 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 C. I've got to say that was pretty good. I can tell you all. It's a little bit difficult to see it like that, so this might help. This is audio representation of the tones. And it's what it looks like if you actually record a Cantonese speaker speaking and look at the level of their tones. Okay, so this gives you an idea. Okay, so let's try this. This is from Wikipedia, by the way. You can just Google it. So let's try again with the tones this time. C, 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 C. Big one. This goes all right from the bottom to the top. C, C. So this one's really long. It's much longer than this. Let's just try again. 1, 2, 3. C, C, C. C, 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 2, 4, 5, 6, C, 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 C.
I'm feeling very Spanish all of a sudden.
Only one question.
The Cantonese.
Why is the English to C or the C in this one?
Sorry?
Why is the English the C or to C in this one?
Everywhere.
The component. No. When you are saying in English, the C or to C, where do you read which one?
It depends on your pronunciation. If you say C,
No.
Intonation.
When you are speaking, normally one word alone in English.
it depends on your pronunciation.
Some people pronounce
English
it the same way.
Yeah, it depends on your pronunciation. If you say,
But this is
I know what you mean, but you can pronounce all the words.
well,
You went a normal.
Okay, right, so let's clear it up. So the point of tones is to distinguish one word that would otherwise sound identical in different ways. Okay? Are the tones fixed? No, they're not. They're very relative. So me and each one of you are going to pronounce these tones slightly differently depending on your tone of voice, how you speak. And also these tones can change depending on the word that comes before and after. Okay, so they're not at all fixed. And I think the main point really is to look at them as being relative and not necessarily do I have to pronounce this tone at this particular pitch, but can I distinguish it from number 1? Or can I distinguish it from number 4? And that's really the thing about tones, they're not at all fixed. They're just a kind of marker.
Sorry? Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
You want the mark?
Go on.
Alright. Do you think that the tones are created, or do you know anything about this? Because there are so many different meanings of the same word. Because in English we obviously have the same phenomenon, like which can mean several different things with the same pronunciation. So why does Cantonese need, or Chinese in general, why does it need the tones? Is it because it has so many words that mean different, or so many words that has different meanings?
So I guess the question is, why is it a tonal language? Or why is any language?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Well, maybe.
It's a really interesting question.
maybe in the later talks.
Yeah.
I know why they're
It's a really interesting question, but to be honest, I've got no idea.
Okay. No problem.
Right, I want you to practice this a little bit and get a feel for it. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give you a little handout with the tones and with some words at the bottom for you to have a look. Okay? So, you could just take a few and pass them. I only made 30 copies because I didn't think I'd get more than about 3 people. So you might have to just pass them down. You might have to share. You could maybe have one between 2, if you don't mind.
Maybe we all can share.
Okay, guys, so what you're looking at this side, okay, you're looking at this side. Okay. Right, so this is the side you're looking at. I'm going to use 6 words, and first of all, just listen to me. Okay, don't say the words, just listen to me, and then afterwards you can practice. Okay. So the first one is king. Okay, don't repeat, just listen. Okay? King, which means to chat. We've got wan, which means interesting. We've got joy, which is a bit difficult to translate. It's again or another time. This is a double-barreled one. Qi di. They actually use the English letter D because they don't have a word for it. To show you how kind of modern and evolving it is. Next one, Chinese speakers will definitely recognise this one. It's a bit okay. And then last one, yao. Okay, so again, just in pairs. Have a look at the tone map if you need it. Just practice saying some of these words and just get a feeling from it. Okay, I'm going to come around and see if I can listen. Okay, so just talk in pairs with your partner and try saying some of these words. Chinese is a bit strange. But now, let's listen to this.
I actually cut it because
Okay.
Yes, go on.
Okay, thank you, bro. Let's just try this one more time before we move on. So, let's just repeat. I'll do one. Okay, so king. Wan. Joy. Qi di. Mo. Yao. It took me 9 months to do this, and you've done it in Right, now, here's the moment of truth. I'd actually prepared dialogue for us to work up in Cantonese so that you could meet other people in the conference. Now the thing is, we're kind of running out of time. And I don't think we're going to be able to do the whole thing. So what we'll do is we'll just do the first line of this, and that will allow you at least to be able to introduce yourself to someone else in You can work it out now because you've got the tones and you've got the dialogue, but I don't think we're going to be able to cover the whole thing in one go. So just have a look at this, and I'm going to just tell you what the whole dialogue is, and then we'll just practice one of the lines, okay? So dialogue goes like this. Hi, I'm Ollie. And you? Hi, I'm John. How's the conference? Great. Or pretty good. Depends on which talk you just seen. How about you? Great. Okay, let's talk later. Sure, see you later. So you can tell it was as simple as I could make it, whilst also being kind of useful. So, Judith asked me to stop at 10 to, so we're only going to have time to do the first one. So, let's just practice this one. So just listen first. Sounds like this. Hi. Just that famous Cantonese word. Hi. Olly Leile. So this is hi. Olly Leile. And this, if we were going to translate this word for word, just to give you an idea, this one, that's maybe a bit too difficult for you, this word. And we've got I call Ollie. This is a particle. It's kind of an expressive particle. It doesn't really have any meaning. Anyone know the meaning of that? You, exactly. And then there, it's like a question word. Okay. So let's try. Pretend that you're all called Ollie for a minute. Okay? So hi. Hi. Come, we can do this one better. Hi. Hi. Ollie. This tone is actually wrong. I think it should be a 4, it should be lower. So let's try again. Hi, Mogi Olia. Hi, Mogi Olia. Leila. Hi, Mogi Olia. Leila. Hi, Mogi Olia. Leila. Time? Hi. This time, substitute your name. If you can remember. Hi, Mogi Olia. Leila. So in a conversation, when you reply, obviously you don't need to say. So it's going to look something like this. Any volunteers? Hi, Mogi Olia. Easy, right? One more volunteer. Anyone? No? Okay, cool. Hi, Mogi Olia. Hi, Mogi Olia. Okay, yeah, so great. So, in the last couple of minutes, as we close and finish the talk, all I'm going to ask you to do, and it might be a bit tricky because there's a lot more people in the room than I thought, is just to mingle, talk to some other people in the room. It's the first day of the conference. Get to know some people. Start it off with Cantonese and see how you can do. Okay, so before we finish, sorry that we didn't have time to. Okay, guys, just a second. Okay. So sorry that we didn't have time to do the whole dialogue. That will give you a start. I would like to have time for questions, so feel free to talk to me at the end if you do. I'm still really in the process of learning Cantonese, and if you'd like to follow my progress on that, you can follow it on my blog, which is this. And thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Everyone to use this once before they leave the room. Thank you very much.